One second. Hey, here we go. Tana, come on now. Anyways,
What's up, bro? Can you hear me?
yeah, we can hear you perfectly.
Dude, is that a real background? Is that really where you are?
Nah.
Oh,
That's my green screen.
I was gonna say that is so rad, the setup.
Oh man. All right, as you guys can see on the screen here, I got my guy here. He's a Florida State fan. Um, I tuned into Twitter Space today. Heard they was talking about the NIL deals. I heard you had a couple points, and I agree with a lot of them. So just wanted to have a conversation about the way that NIL is going right now. Now, I am for players getting paid, but I think there should be a limit and some rules put behind this, especially when you see players start hitting the transfer portal from teams where they're starting, where they're, you know, just leaving to basically get more money or more opportunities to get more money, not just, get to the next level. So give them a quick introduction, let them know who you are and stuff like that.
Hey man, yeah, my name's Michael Kirkering. I do my own shows sometimes. It's just Let's Talk College Football. It's on Spotify. I haven't uploaded a show for this season yet or anything, but and I run an Instagram account called at College Football Classics. If you're into just old highlights of games, I'm just nerdy, so I throw stuff on there just for fun memories. If you like that, but yeah, man, I just it's obviously a crazy time in college football between the portal and what was. It's crazy that we're at a time where like expansion playoff talk should be like the craziest thing we're talking about, but all these other insane things with teams moving conferences and then NIL all happening at the same time, it's like that's clearly at the forefront because it affects the future, and I think people are concerned about the future. You know what I mean? So I think
All
that's
right, so let me get your take on it because as of right now, NIL is in full effect. I mean, we're seeing reports of millions kids that even signed to teams in the NFL draft that just passed it isn't
yeah, crazy.
making some of that kind of money. From what I'm seeing, and I'm not quite sure the numbers on it, but the kid from Pitt, Addison, the wide receiver, if I'm not mistaken, he is being enticed with around $3 million, if I'm not mistaken. So
Yeah,
you
it
got,
looked like anywhere from 2 to 4 or something crazy, plus like a house or something
yeah.
also, like
So it's a lot of crazy things going on when it comes to NIL. Now, me personally, I do believe in them getting paid, but I do believe it's supposed to be some kind of policy, some kind of rules, or something, pertaining to what you can do and can't do.
yeah.
Because let's just be honest, a lot of tampering is going to be going on, whether you get caught or not. That's the question. And on top of that is, who's what's the penalties? There's
Well, I
no.
don't even think getting caught is even that much of a concern because you got to remember, like, yeah, like we grew up in this day of NCAA where like they were crazy and they would come after you, and like you needed to. Obviously, tons of teams were breaking rules and doing stuff, but you had to keep it quiet. And if anything became out in the open, or even like you were showing something off, if you weren't keeping as crazy hush hush about it, they were going to come after you and get you in trouble. Well, for the last year, I don't think that's really been the case, at least surrounding anything related to the NIL stuff. And I think tampering is now kind of lumped in with that. So no one's afraid of getting caught. So they're going to keep doing it. And I've heard that stuff used to even go on a little bit even before 1 year transfers. So it's just, and now it's just been exacerbated with NIL. I think the problem is, like, my main breakdown of it is there's two camps that collided on once. Both of them made a lot of sense at the time, but what was why did the transfer portal happen? Why, oh, these kids need to go everywhere? That's part of what I call the players' rights movement that took huge strides over the last 10 years. And that was about they're unpaid athletes. So the scholarship's not enough at this point. The money's too big. Let's get more stuff involved, right? There was like unlimited meal plans back in the day, like little things that kept getting better, housing, cost of attendance, some money, small stipends, things like that. And now it's gotten to the point, hey, should they be paid? Well, freedom also, right? Transfer portal. Hey, coaches leave on these kids whenever they want. These are unpaid athletes. If they want to transfer schools, why do we have a problem with that? And everybody's kind of moved that direction. Like, yeah, you know what? These are unpaid athletes. They need to have these rights and these types of things. And I agree with that completely, as unpaid athletes. Then you have another side of people that have always been like, hey, they should get paid. And if you're arguing the players should get paid, any cut of money like by schools, then you are arguing for a pay for play type of situation. No matter how much money it is or not, that's what it would be. And once the sport becomes professionalized in a pay for play way, you can't have all the rules for the old system, which was they weren't, right? Because this transferring whenever you want, free agency, and a professional system where people are getting paid, those things don't mix, right, very well. What I was saying in the space, is like, hey, the NFL could not function if there was free agency for every single player every single year, right? That would be disastrous for the product, at least. And I think the players' rights movement people are so caught up in just like what they think this player should be allowed to do. And you have the other people like me. I'm coming at it, I will admit, a little selfishly from the fan perspective. And I don't mind them getting paid. Like, my personal opinion, I'm all for them getting paid. The amount of money doesn't bother me. I don't care if it's $20 million. So I don't care about them getting paid, and I don't care how much it is. All I care about as a fan, and the only reason I have concerns is for the integrity of a sports league. It's hard to envision a sports league thriving where you do have pay for play, but you have rules set up where this unlimited free agency type thing, and there's no caps or there's nothing around it. NIL wasn't supposed to be that originally, right? It was supposed to be they have the freedom to make money off their name, image, and likeness. That's a brand reaching out to you because you are a celebrity. You're actually worth that market value. And obviously what we're seeing in college football is just, it's a straight up pay for play. It can't be directly connected to the schools, but anybody says it's not, that is insane. And whether it's the collective route, which you see like Florida State getting involved in, a big amount of schools doing this collective route, or like what Miami's doing, which is basically just being way more open about it. And, the guy that got funding the kids with the wallet thing, like, that's awesome. Like, it's brilliant to me too. So you got all sorts of different ways, but all of those, I think we can all agree, it's a pay for play thing. At least in the shadows of it, right? That's what it is.
If you smell what the canes are cooking.
Whoa,
Rock.
I didn't expect that. I wasn't expecting that.
Anyway, I just don't think, those two worlds colliding. So it's kind of like one of them's got to give, right? If NIL's, it's hard because I don't see how you could put either of them back, right? Because, but you basically have those two crowds colliding, and I think they're arguing with each other a lot and not realizing that they're both on the same page. They just are kind of in these two different camps, and yeah, it's a weird place.
Yeah, I think they gotta at least set up some boundaries, some rules, maybe even a cap to it, because you got guys entering the transfer portal just because they're being enticed for NIL money. Perfect example for, there's a guy, I forgot his name. I think it's his last name is Lowly. He's from Arizona State University. Enters the transfer portal with no intentions of actually transferring, but actually just to get more money out of the school for NIL, which is totally insane.
A college holdout, basically, which we see in the pros a lot. The difference is in the pros. In the pros, I have nothing wrong with a lot of people in the pros that get mad at holdouts. Look, I'm all for free markets and making money. So in the pros, where that's your employer, you're literally for work, and you think you're worth more, you go to them and say, "Hey, I'm worth more." But because it's a sports league, you don't just get to go say, "And if you don't pay me more, I'm going to go see who will." Right? They might have a contract with you. And, when Le'Veon Bell at the Steelers did his big holdout with Pittsburgh, and then you had Ezekiel Elliott do his with Dallas, I bring those up because two different things happened, right? Pittsburgh was faced with them like, well, dude, we don't think you're worth that. They decided not to pay him. That was kind of bad for Le'Veon Bell. Elliott's case, he held out. He got the Cowboys to pay him. So it's just a consensual contract at that point, and you have the right to bargain. In college, you have that extra thing where not only can I have a holdout, which I wouldn't have a problem with the players saying, "Hey, I'm not going to come to camp if I don't get NFL NIL money," like the pros. But when you can say, oh, and if you don't give it to me, even though that means you're right about what I'm worth, then I'm going to just leave and go to another school. Because again, free agency every single year is going to, I think what happened in college basketball that it lost was when the one and done era really took over and the roster turnover was so extreme at the top for all the good teams. You lost that feeling of like you really got to know teams, because it takes 2 years, maybe 3 years. You're growing with the quarterback of a team in different eras, right? Imagine having 1 year of Trevor Lawrence, 1 year of any great player that we know in our sport of college. Basketball kind of turned into that, and it didn't go away. It's still there. People still love the tournament, but I do think that regular season kind of feel went away a little bit in basketball, and I'm just worried about seeing that in football. I think if like the roster turnover gets too crazy on a yearly basis, then it's just kind of like, okay, like it's going to lose some of that, and people aren't going to feel like they're getting to know these teams. And I mean, there's a whole bunch of potential issues you could get into. The problem is when it comes to fixing it, like you said, is as long as it's labeled NIL, you can't do something like put a salary cap on it, because technically out there in the world of the rules right now, NIL is all it is. Pay for play is still banned and doesn't exist. So even though we clearly see that's what's happening, as far as the rules are concerned, these NIL deals are getting passed because every school has like a thing to make sure it's legit, right? And they're saying, yeah, technically, hypothetically, you're allowed to sign that NIL deal. We would be in the green here. So they're all happening, but they're all considered NIL. So the way the court worked by basically empowering all these states to make this happen, if they're still labeled NIL, then they can't put a cap on it because the state laws literally prevent it. So you're not going to get a cap until they actually start calling it pay for play, which why would they do that at this point, right? NCAA is gone. So you can't put a cap on it unless that happens. So either that's going to have to happen, or if we accept this new reality, we can fix it, I think, with they would have to roll back some of the transfer portal stuff. Or maybe the adjustment is collectives and NIL groups that are making these deals. They basically have contracts in them about you have to start staying 1 or 2 years. They started like making that a part of the thing. Maybe when Pittsburgh, because remember, Jordan Addison got into some NIL stipulations like 4 or 5 months ago. He almost left Pitt, and their coach has been open about like, yeah, like 12 teams came after him and we had to basically make him happy. So they obviously paid him something. I think in the future, when these situations arise and you do keep Jordan Addison, like included in that is going to be some sort of clause. They'll find a way, right? Whether it's legal or not, to basically, and you have to stay here, or we can sue you, or there's going to be some sort of, you don't just get to go, or at the very least, another collective has to buy you out and we get something for it. See, people compare, oh, coaches leave all the time and abandon their contracts. Well, but when that happens, it's only because the coach is not allowed and would lose a ton of money if they said, I'm just quitting this job and I'm going to go out to the market and just try to find another one tomorrow. I'm quitting instead of getting fired. That's why you never see that. Coaches are always fired in this sport, even when they know they're dead man walking, because quitting is way different than fired. When you fire a coach in a contract, you as the employer have to honor that contract. If there's 3 years left of that and he's guaranteed that money, you have to give it to him. So the school that steals your coach has to buy that. So there might be $4 million left on my coach's buyout. Well, the school that is poaching my coach from me, he's going to pay us that. So we're getting paid for that. Or if we want him fired, we have to eat that. And that's why you see these schools fire coaches and they're paying double coaching salaries for a couple more years because they're still paying the old guy not to coach. So when Jordan Addison leaves Pitt gets nothing. They developed him. They recruited him. They had an all-star, and they're building their program based on bringing in good players. And now Jordan Addison's going to finish his career in a USC uniform and probably go down as a USC player because of that. We always remember the last school you went to, right?
Right.
Most people outside the ACC consider Russell Wilson a Wisconsin Badger when it's like he was balling for 3 years at NC State. Like that dude is a Wolfpack, right? But that's just how you're remembered, your legacy. So, I mean, if Addison goes and has a crazy season at USC this year, he's going to be a USC guy for life. And then, like, what, does Pitt still put, like, posters of him up? Or is he still a legendary Pitt player? Like, think about it. All the legends and greats at your school have never went and played and finished their careers somewhere else, right? for Florida State, right? Our Warwick Dunns, our Peter Warwicks, our Chris McGee, name the list, right? For Miami, you guys got tons of those guys. None of them ever like went and played somewhere else. So imagine that. If you're Pitt, your best player ever at that position, receiver, an amazing player, an amazing season, he's going to go like finish at another school. And now it's like he's going to be a Trojan. When he goes to the draft, that's going to be USC got a draft player, not Pitt. And like, so it's weird and awkward. And as a fan, it's like, oh, like it's just a weird thing to accept. And you don't like to see it in that sense. At the same time, I'll admit it's hypocritical that I do enjoy when the transfer portal creates what I do want, which is parity, right? So when I see a stacked receiver room and a guy get out of there to go start somewhere, right? Or one of Georgia's linemen jumps in the portal because he wants to start somewhere, right? Like how we got, then I don't mind that because I'm like, for me, it all goes back to, again, the sport and what I want to protect and what I want to see. And that might sound selfish as a fan, but I'm ultimately a believer that if the fans are happy, there's just more revenue, more eyes on the sport. And that's going to end up in more money for everyone in the long run. So
yeah.
Fans were already, not too happy with this, the lack of parity. The playoff had been not doing well as they wanted it to because people are sick of, the same teams, and the semis are always blowouts, and people are sick of every year there only being maybe 1 or 2, 3 at most rosters that actually have a shot to win it all. And a lot of times it's the exact same teams each year. People were getting really sick of that. They want to see more parity at the top, and that's why the playoff was expanding and all this other talk is going on. So, and the problem with conferences getting different revenue, right? Like that's not good. Like as ACC guys, I hate Miami, but like if Miami's not good, the ACC is not going to come back. Florida State needs to play their part, so does Clemson, or we're going to be absolutely screwed long term with revenue. And a lot of people don't want to talk about that. I know a lot of Miami fans in the space were like, well, that doesn't affect us because we basically have like our booster money and like the guys that are behind us now, and we can just make up for all that. But it's still a ton of money, and it's not like there's not SEC schools that have the same level of donors Miami does, but they get that insane SEC contract from television. ACC is basically being doubled by them. And they're about to renegotiate their deal and make more money. And we're about to, in the ACC, be stuck in our deal until 2036. And it's already a terrible deal. We're not going to survive 10 more years of that. So college football already had all these problems about the sport falling apart before NAL, right? With the conference movement, how these conferences aren't equal and all that. But now NIL thrown on top of it, sometimes I feel like that's going to save it all, because I do look at NIL as this opportunity for schools that have money. Because again, we're never going to get to that type of parity like NFL, like, oh, now Iowa State can win a championship every year, right? But at least among the big brands, it'd be nice to get more parity among that, right? That's what I think is classic as a fan. And I think NIL gives, fan bases like Miami, right, who hasn't been great for almost 20 years at that level they want to be, Tennessee, Nebraska, they all have the money, they all have the resources and the passion to make these things happen. And NIL allows you to maybe do that, right, and level the playing field, because now everybody has to compete for players, and there's a lot of schools that have enough money to compete with each other. Yeah, there's a lot of schools that have way more money than other schools, and if there is no sort of cap on this, then yeah, like an Iowa State definitely isn't going to ever compete with Ohio State. But it doesn't just have to be Ohio State, Alabama, and Georgia, right? You're going to have basically all the schools that are willing to throw those dollars be successful. Or think about the past. It was like you had to throw dollars and it was still way harder. And it's not going to be easy now. You could have a great roster, and I still think coaching is really important. But just for sake of argument, think about the past. You could throw all this money. Texas has been throwing ungodly amounts of money. So is A&M at trying to win the national title. They're spending as much as Bama, but they aren't beating them in recruiting still. They don't have saving. A&M finally is, but let's be honest. NIL was a huge reason, maybe not why they had a great recruiting class, but why they had the most legendary, probably of all time, recruiting class. NIL is a huge part of that. They're a little more hush-hush about it, the way they kind of do it. We don't see the deals. It's not like what Miami's doing, but that was all NIL. And if Texas A&M becomes another big power in the sport, well, that's awesome. This isn't like a team that's won a national championship since anyone and their grandmother's been alive. So that's new, that's relevancy. And if other programs can start doing that, that's a good thing for me. So I've been hoping that NIL and this, especially doing it this way with the collectives, where you're basically buying recruiting classes, whether you like pay for play or not, this is where we're at. So if you want to just watch the sport get better, hopefully NIL causes it to get better on that sense. So when I see those type of things, or I see the portal open up, like I said, and like an offensive lineman for Georgia, who we almost got in the portal, a few weeks ago, like forget the schools and how that sucked for my school, but just in general, like when you see a backup lineman at Georgia who's not seeing the field and he's a 5-star, like an absolute stud. And he's like, okay, instead of being a backup at Georgia, I'm going to go to another big, awesome school and have a big season like Jermaine Johnson just did for us. He was apparently not in the starting rotation at Georgia. Now it's kind of obvious why. You saw that draft the other night, right? But the dude was still a freak, awesome college football player. And he's like, I'm an every down player at this level. The problem is I'm on this school with like 9 of us when we should be a little more spread out. And you look at the older days of college football, not even 10 years ago, and you saw a lot of that. Like you might have had a great receiving core, right? The old Ohio State teams with Trussell, they had great receiving cores. Florida State, when we won the championship in 2013, we had a great receiving core. But we didn't have the top 3, like 1, 2, 3 in that order, best receivers in the entire country just on one team. And maybe also the best linebackers, all the best. I mean, like the roster gaps at the top have gotten crazy the last 4 to 5, 6 years specifically, as Bama has basically just become a destination where if I get offered by Bama, I go. No one else can beat me out for them. Georgia and Ohio State kind of in the same boat. Clemson was like flirting with that during their really good years, but they've always been a little more selective and not always gone after those guys anyway. And I remember Florida State, we were like had about a 2-3 year run there of like recruiting at that level, and you saw how that resulted for us. It was pretty good. So, but it was nothing like this now, where like I said, 2-3 schools, every position almost.
I want to look at this comment because Mr. Kane's to you looks like you created an LLC and basically buy the players and call it an NIL deal, because that's basically what it is now.
Yeah, right. So like that's what I'm saying. Like when I went back to the punishment argument is like, hey, technically there isn't tampering. Technically you can't use it as an inducement. Remember, technically on paper the rule is you cannot use this as an inducement. But this isn't the old NCAA with this issue where, hey. So what Miami's doing right now, or what I create a fake LLC in 1 hour and then I send the kid NIL money. If the NCAA was the old NCAA that enforced their rules, they would obviously investigate that and instantly be like, you set up an LLC and then a couple weeks or months later, the money went direct to this kid. This is clearly a pay-for-play scheme. But they're obviously not showing that interest. So that means we have to believe this is just going to run its course until somebody jumps back in. I don't know who could at this point. That's what the sport's kind of looking for, is that there's clearly some regulation that needs going on and the sport kind of needs saved in some ways, but nobody knows how to do it because the courts just told the NCAA to go piss off, at least with this issue. So now they're scared to literally touch it in any way, right? They're scared to enforce their own rule because what if we get ruled again somehow on this? And maybe they would, who knows? So and it's their fault. They've got no one to blame with themselves because they should have dealt with this a long time ago and put a plan in place that they could get behind and enforce and allow these kids to make awesome endorsement deals, which they absolutely deserve, but have an actual team set up that would basically be able to figure out, hey, this isn't real when you're buying these players. This is pay for play. These high school kids haven't done anything yet. No brand would actually give them $8 million to promote their brand. That's not a smart business decision for that company. That's what NIL is. And you would have to have some sort of financial team that can say, this guy's way over market value, what we would have him right now, So, but that doesn't exist because the NCAA, crapped the bed with this.
You see it because what is going to happen is with the way NIL is going, the teams with the most money is going to prosper. And then the teams that don't have it, they're going to start getting the bottom feeders of recruits. And eventually those programs are just going to fall off completely. So there won't be no parity. You'll know that Alabama got money, Texas got money, Miami got money. These schools got money. They'll get the top recruits because they can pay for it. And then when college football playoffs come around, you'll see the same exact teams battling it out every single time. So it'll kind of push away all the other schools that ever had any single chance of actually thinking they could win a championship.
That is possible, and that's the negative approach. if I give you the positive approach, though, what I'm saying is if college football was already super parity right now, if half the field or more had realistic shots at even making the playoff, then it would be different. But right now we're at a place where literally we're talking 1, 2, maybe 3 teams a year have a chance to win the title. And that's really like turning a lot of people off, especially the postseason. I talked about what basketball did wrong earlier, but what basketball still does great is that tournament is awesome, right? And you have a bunch of 1 seeds, but you never know who's going to win the college basketball national championship. You could have been the best team all year long, and it just takes that one night in a basketball game to lose. And you got to go win 6 in a row if you're going to be national champs. That's hard for anyone. So there's never like before the season starts, this team wins the title, or maybe it'll be that team, 2 teams, because you're like, well, this team might be really good, but then they got to go to the tournament, and I think they could win it, but that's a hard tournament. So I mean, 8
and the
seeds,
good thing about that too is you have 64 teams. So before it even starts, there are 64 options of a champion. With this NIL deal thing, listen, I love it because I'm in Miami. We got billionaire boosters that's doing it for us. So I love it. But I got to look at it from a different standpoint, that college football as a whole. Now, let's just say the changes that happen, the 4th and 14 didn't happen. We still be with Manny Diaz. We'll still be with our old, AD. We wouldn't have this kind of money behind us. What would NIL deal look like for us? Because nobody would put any money behind the program if it was still in the stage that it was last year. So I'm looking at it from that standpoint too. Like, NIL is great. Get the top players to come, offer them the little money or whatever. But if you're that school that can't afford to outbid an Alabama, outbid a Miami, outbid a Texas, a California team, Oregon, or whoever, then you're going to be the ones stuck with the other players that cannot compete at that top level with the top recruits.
Yeah. Well, again, though, like, so on the positive aspect of what I'm hoping this can do is, like, I'm not that worried that like Oregon State and Duke and even schools like Kentucky, like, right, long-term history wise, a handful of all our ACC schools, right? I'm not worried that those guys aren't going to be able to outbid Bama and Texas and all them, because they can't do it now. They're not even close to being able to do it now, right? What sucks now, though, is you have big-time schools for Nebraska, Tennessee, in the current system. In Miami, at least right now, Florida State, at least right now, we can't outbid Alabama or Georgia for any recruits right now. It's not possible. But NIL does make that possible, because now you're getting a lot more down to dollars and cents. So you're never going to have parity in college football across the whole thing. That's actually not what we want. That's not the sport we like. We do like when you got your dominant teams throughout the year. We just want more variety of that. We want to have more runs like we had before, instead of the same 2 or just the same 3. So NIL, you would think, if all the big brands, because there are a lot of brands that, if we're just talking money and maybe buying players, can compete with Alabama and Ohio State and Georgia. Every conference probably has 3 or 4 of them, right? Break it down. In the Big Ten, I think Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, all 3 of those schools have the financial resources to be competitive with each other. Now, Ohio State still might end up with better coaching and these other things that make them still in the pecking order above those schools. But from just this financial perspective, they're right there. The SEC's got like 7 or 8 of them, right? That from a financial standpoint, if that's the new war, that's how those teams are going to war, they're pretty even, right? ACC, we at least have Florida State, Clemson, and it looks like Miami's stepping up with their coaching change in the financial game now. There's 3 of us. I could keep going. In the Pac-12, you kind of maybe only have 2. USC clearly, and I think Oregon can do that if they want to with that money. So it's just going to come down to that, and the new top tier could go from 2 teams to maybe 12, 13, 15 teams. Those big brands, the Notre Dames, the classic brands that we all love in college football. And if there's more of a pass through of those teams shuffling for national titles all the time, like, that would be great. I think, like, that's kind of the college football we all want. And yeah, maybe in some fantasy, like we want to even see, like I said, like an Oregon State win a national title one day. But I mean, that was never going to happen. That was never happening before. There's never been a college football era where those, smaller schools you described at a disadvantage, like really have a shot to win it all. But if there's a lot more variety at the top among those big brands, that I think that's what's going to make the sport great again. Where every year you read about those 12 to 15 teams that kind of, like, because it used to be, I feel like when I was a kid, if you were in the top 25, you were pretty hyped for the season. You thought things could happen, maybe anything. Maybe you were wrong about that, but like that's the way it felt. Where now it's basically becoming like you see the preseason rankings 1, 2, 3, 4. By the time you get to 4 or 5, you're like, I've already hit a wall where like there's no one capable of winning at all. And you want that list to just like extend down more as far as you can get it to. So if NIL can cause that to happen, and that's the net outcome of the whole thing, then I'll be happy, right? And the transfer portal too, right? If the net outcome, if the majority of transfer portal cases are backups that are still really good going to other schools to create more parity and NIL money helps that happen, then I'll be okay with that. And I'll be willing to live with the Jordan Addison cases if they're the minority. The downside, the negative, I think what you were describing is what if what happened with Jordan Addison, like a really good player just abandoning his school essentially and then moving up to the next highest thing. If that's what keeps happening, then that's going to suck. And if that's the majority thing, so it could go one of two ways. I'm hoping it leans more that positive way because I don't see any other way out. I don't see a fix or anything.
I think that's what it's going to come down to. You're going to start seeing kids that are starting. They're at their school. They're starting. Hit the transfer portal. Why? More money, other places. A lot of maybe
forget the money. It could be as simple as just like Pittsburgh maybe sucks, and you're like, I want to go live in LA, like, or I want to come live in Miami, right? Just like we see in the NBA, like NBA free agency has gone too far, and you've seen that. Right? They've kind of screwed over their fans as a sports league where they allowed this way too much freedom for players' movement. And now, and you can't blame, again, I'm not blaming the players for any of these decisions. They should. In the NBA, I got to go play basketball and that's my career. Well, why don't I go do it in LA or Miami, right? Or why don't I form a super team while I do it and call up my buddies and see if we can get like 4 of us all-stars to go play on Golden State or something or Brooklyn, whatever, and like create a super team, right? And the players have almost more control of creating a lot of these teams than the organizations. And that's not good because now these small market teams are almost never going to keep a player past his rookie contract. And basically they're never going to win a title, right? Where football, the NFL, is the best product as far as sports go in this country where there's an insane amount of parity. I mean, you can go from not that good to Super Bowl champs quick. Way quicker than you can in any other sport, right? And you can have a great season, and then all of a sudden the next season balls just not bouncing your way, and you were 8-8, and things like that happen all the time. So, I hope the top level of college football can get closer to that, where you just see a lot more of 11-1, 10-2 teams down that stretch, and that playoff argument is like, hey, we're sitting here. If it's only a 4-team playoff, it'd be nice to be sitting there at the end. Hey, it's conference championship Saturday, and we got like 7 teams that are sort of alive. And based on the winners of these games, that's kind of how we're going to decide the 4 and go into it that way. That would be nice.
I got a fantasy question here, guys. I'm an FSU fan, but I like the channel. I have a question. Do you think if we combine Miami and FSU together, we have enough talent between us to beat Georgia or Alabama? What's your take on that?
Honestly, no. If you think about it, just look at it this way. I won't take into consideration some of the transfers that have come in on our squads this year. So let's just focus on last year's talent. Florida State, we had 1 guy drafted in the entire draft.
We did.
And I'm not sure what Miami did. Maybe 1?
1.
Okay, so just think about that. Think about the talent level that even if we combine forces, we would still only have 2 guys that got drafted. And you want to go play Georgia, they had 15 guys drafted. So I'm thinking, no, you're still losing that game, is my opinion.
Yeah, I don't even want to go into trying to combine talent. I just want the talent to clash and have the rival just the way it is. But
Exactly.
that was
Yeah,
a
I
great
mean,
question.
no, definitely not.
Now me, I think the direction we're going with the transfer portal, it's only going to get worse. I think it's only going to get worse. I think this year has proven it NIL wise. I mean, on your guys' end, you have what Jarvis Brownlee holding out or practice because he didn't get NIL money, stuff like that. That
I mean, look, it's one thing if you're talking about just the sense of not liking holdouts in college because it's just not like I'm with you there. Like if I lived in my fantasy world, college football would always be just the way it was and be all nice and dandy, right? Like that's what I wish, right? I rewatch old games all the time. That's why I run that old channel. I love those old memories. But it's not now. As long as the field product doesn't change, I'm okay. Because again, college football had problems before NIL. Like for me, I'm already feeling some of those issues. When players don't play in bowl games, when these big bowl games don't matter, I hate that. So forget NIL for a second. There was already a lot of things in this sport that were going this direction of like, it just didn't feel like that college football that we all love. And we've got to find this balance between because it's warranted that these players deserved this and should have got this, I think, right? NIL and all this other stuff. So you got that, but then you got to take into consideration how the majority of fans feel, which I think are more like you and me, right? Like in that Kane space, a lot of them are like, it's irrelevant. Like we don't care if it's this random new league that's totally different than what we grew up on, but I mean, I think a lot of college football fans want that. And if my team's not winning, I still love obsessing over the sport and how it's going and following all the big stories.
now see
Where in
me.
the NFL, I just follow my team. I'm a Bucks fan, always have been. I follow the Bucks. I don't have 7 TVs going on Sundays like I do on Saturdays, where I'm obsessed with every storyline in each conference and all the ranked teams playing each other. For me, it's like that season-long thing of, well, who's going to end up on top? And one loss is such a big deal in college, or at least it used to be, right? And teams getting knocked out. And by the end of it, you have this basically 100-team tournament. But in college, it was the regular season, right? That was our tournament. That the things fell and upsets happened. And at the end of it, yeah, they were always great teams, 2 great teams that went to that championship game. But there was a way more fun roller coaster of how you got there. And teams that were good enough to be there and win it would sometimes not make it because of an extra loss, right? But they were competitive. Where with this 14 playoff, you've lost some of that regular season. I hate that stuff. I hate, the bowl games not mattering. And that's why now I'm a fan of expanding the playoff and hoping they bring all the bowl games back into it. And then you won't have any holdouts in those playoff games. Even though my fantasy would love to just go back to the BCS system, that's not happening. So the way to move forward and kind of find a common ground would be doing that route. When it comes to NIL, like I said, it's the same thing. If NIL is happening and you basically have pay for play, and in pay for play, there's going to be holdouts and there's going to be these things you see in the NFL when it comes to money, like with Jarvis Brownlee, right? Well, the thing is he wanted more money, and we were like, but what was really going on there is he was one of our best defensive backs last year. So anybody wants a preview, if Florida State's gotten a little better this offseason, people keep asking me, I have to think yes, because at several positions, the starter is now 3rd or 4th string and is left. So Brownlee, and I love Brownlee. I loved watching him play, just the energy. He was one of the guys I really liked last year on our pretty awful team. But he is now what I'm feeling a little better about. The DB room is like he was the best corner last year, pretty much undoubtedly, in my opinion. At least top 2. He was starting. And now he's like, wasn't going to be in that top 2, 3, 4 rotation because some of the freshmen we brought in are really good and other guys are developing. So he didn't get that NIL deal he wanted, and he transferred. So at the end of the day, like I still think that transfer was more based on playing time than NIL, even though there was some NIL involved. And it's the gut punch ones, like the Georgia Tech running back going to Alabama. That sucked because you're like, look, this is just Georgia Tech. They don't have much. They're pretty bad, but they got this really good running back. At least there's some story at Georgia Tech, one of the best running backs. Oh, then he just goes and fills Bama's hole. Well, I'm already sick of Bama winning it every year and like no one challenging them. And now when there's an opportunity, they need a running back. Will they just go steal it from another team and then they keep on rolling that way? Like that's annoying. And then Addison's the biggest gut punch, right, as a fan, because it's like he left a good team. Like Pitt was really good last year. Pitt had Kenny Pickett. They had Addison. They go to a New Year's Six game, which before this playoff era would have been insane, right? And a huge storyline. And you're like, okay, is Pitt going to continue this at all? Was just a 1 year wonder? Was this Matt Ryan at Boston College, or is Pitt doing some other stuff that's going to make them a program? Remember, Clemson came out of nowhere. Clemson was a Pitt not that long ago. They were a 6-6 average, 7-5 team, and they jumped up to be a national power. It is possible for schools to do this. Like, can Pitt do that? I don't know. I'm interested to see. Maybe Slovis steps in and they're good. They had the best receiver in the country. Oh, but now he's gone. And now he won't even probably be remembered as a Pitt player. And you talk about building a program. Yeah, how are you going to build a program if every time you get a good guy, they're just going to what's already more established, right? And then we just have a de facto farm system. And that's why the NFL mixed with the transfer portal is super sketchy right now. But like I said, if in the long run, what ends up happening is you get way more, as far as the transfer portal is concerned, you get way more players leaving the good schools to start at a school that they didn't originally go to. If that's the majority in the Addison thing, it'll still happen sometimes, but if that's the minority, I'll live with it, right? And then same on NIL. If NIL results in a lot more parity at the top of college football, and Tennessee's competitive soon, and Miami gets back to their status, and it doesn't mean Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State have to go anywhere, but just a better mix, an epic playoff thing, and then they expand the playoff to 12, and I start getting good games on most rounds instead of 2 semifinal blowouts all the time. If all those things happen, I'll live with that too. So for me, I'm just more looking for it as what it does to my product on the field, like what it does to the sport I love. And if it does something good for it on paper and I'm more entertained on Saturdays, then yeah, I'll actually maybe love this stuff. But if it does ruin the sport and takes it the direction I don't want to see it go in, then of course I'm going to have animosity towards all these things. So
yeah, to me, with all the NIL thing, because I was in the space and I was listening, and I try to even challenge the point of, okay, let's just say you have starters on our team. Let's just throw out a name. Tyler Van Dyke. Tyler Van Dyke, he's gonna start. It's his job. Now, let's just say other teams entice him. Well, Tyler, I know you're getting maybe $500,000 down there in Miami. Come play for us. Come start for us. $2 million right now. Then let's just say if Tyler Van Dyke takes that deal, then we're going to start feeling scorned by NIL the same exact way. But when you have the boosters and you have the money and the NIL deals to go along with it, you as a fan, you're not feeling the pain of what it's going to cost to college football as a whole futuristically. Because that's what you're going to have. You're going to have the top bidders. It's going to be like an auction for the top players. 35, 45, whatever. Sold, Alabama.
It will be, obviously. That's why I'm hoping, because at the end of the day, forget pay for play in NIL. It's already like that, though. That's what I don't like, is it might not be through direct payment. I'm literally buying you with dollars to come here. But however you've done it, Alabama's got more resources than this other school. So they can lure you in that way. And now NIL is a part of it, but NIL might level it out at the top. And that's, I think, all you can ask for is that at the top, right? And at the top, I'm talking 15 to 20 schools possibly, right? There's a lot of big brands in the sport that have money and can make it potentially awesome. You got to also remember, we're in the early stages of this, the infancy. So maybe what a wide receiver is worth now, right? Because we don't know what this real market is, pay for play. We know what NFL salaries are. Maybe a wide receiver is worth $4 million. If you're literally the Biletnikoff winner, you're the best receiver in the nation, that might be the top receiver contract at this level. A school could easily say, you're worth that, right? Think about how much they pay these coaches every year. If you really think about how much money is in this sport, like I think a quarterback, like for example, if Bryce Young went to the open market tomorrow, and every school had a chance at him, I think easily he's worth $2 to $5 to $6 million to bring in for just that year because of what he could potentially do for your school. So maybe in the future, these numbers will get more sorted out because you have data and examples. And then a Jordan Addison will basically, after he wins the Biletnikoff, he'll already get to $4 million when he comes back to Pitt for that year, it'll just be like, hey, we already are taking care of him because you just won the Blitnikoff. Of course, we're upgrading your contract and doing this for you. It'll just get to that. And now USC can't come and steal him. And maybe they get to a point where these NIL deals, like I said, are coming in with like, you have to be here one more year or whatever.
Right.
So like I said, it just sucks because we're going through the birth of this, right? So it might take Jordan Addison this year, and God forbid something, like you said, it would suck if it happened to you guys, Van Dyke leaves, or it's going to happen to some of the stuff. Maybe Addison is the thing that makes it so that market corrects. And now every school, even if they're Pitt, who's not as big as the other schools, but now they know if they have a Blitnikoff in the future, if they want to keep him around, this is how they do it. And if every school is adjusted to that, then maybe we don't have this happen all the time. So, but right now we're just living in this thing where some schools are catching up and some aren't. So last year there was like 3 teams that had NIL figured out for recruiting. This year there was like 15, 20 of them. Next year there's going to be like 45 of them, right? By the time we're in 2024, 2026, this collective thing and what's kind of new at some schools, that's just going to be your standard. Every school has it. And a lot of them will be able to compete financially with each other in that aspect. So we'll see what that does to the sport, I guess. It's going to be a journey.
Yeah, I think once more boosters start showing up at other schools, then we're gonna get into a bidding war here and there, and then you're gonna start seeing players that hasn't even taken a snap yet that's already making more money than an NFL draft pick. Because Addison is a perfect example. Going to USC, if he goes to USC, I'm not quite sure if that's already done. But if he does go to USC, he's picking up $3 million in a house. I think a rookie contract is around $3 million, if I'm not mistaken, for a first-round draft pick.
First round, yeah.
Closer, so he's not even NFL yet. He's already making what a first-rounder would make, from a couple of days ago.
And that's fine too, because think about this. Another thing, especially when you were young, probably growing up watching college football, you always hoped every junior would come back for that senior year, right? Because you wanted to see him one more time. And it basically, we got to a point where that never happened, right? Now that never happens. It's 3 years and done if you're one of those good players. Where some of them, yeah, they're draft eligible, but they're going to go be, how many guys do you see leave school early? And it's not like they're a first rounder. They're like a 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th undrafted free agent, sometimes even. Well, NIL might make you keep players around, because I think what's more important than recruits is proven players. That's why Addison's worth $4 million and no recruit would be, because you've seen him do it. You've seen him be the best receiver in this game. And now it's like the NFL, where like, hey, we're going to go pay all this money to get this free agent because for the last 3 years, he's been the best and he's going to be the best with us, hopefully. So it's going to be like that.
I think the only plus side is you'll actually see more kids play out their 4 years in college.
Yeah, especially the kids that are like, right, like the Tebows and like that were great college players, but they weren't quite a super high draft pick at their position. College football is full of those guys, but when they weren't allowed to get any money, they would be like, if I get invited to a mini camp, it's worth leaving school for, even though there's no guarantee of any money in some of those situations, right? But just the chance at money I'm leaving school for. If you're going to make me comfortable, right, especially when you start talking millions of dollars, then it's like, yes, of course I'll play in a league where there's less competition. I might be having really fun. I might enjoy college, right? A lot of people enjoy college. It's fun, right? And you're going to pay me a ton of money to go have another year of fun, awesome college and play sports. Then yeah, why wouldn't a lot more kids stay? Especially the ones that aren't like, first or second, third rounders. Baycott at North Carolina, if you want to get into basketball, is a good example, because basketball has some of those players too. Like another North Carolina guy, Tyler Hansborough, if you remember him, like a great college player, but was like a junior and a senior and was never going to be this crazy NBA guy, right? You might start seeing more of those. And that's what both of those sports need. College football and college basketball are the best products when the best players are juniors and seniors, I think, right? Especially in basketball, right? The one and done freshman stuff and this constant turnover kind of killed that fun way to follow that sport, because you just can't keep up anymore. And so college could be more like, hey, this guy's a celebrity in college, right? Think about how much money Johnny Manziel would have been worth, even though he might have had talent graded to get out, right? If we had another year of Johnny Manziel in college football, that would have been phenomenal, right? Like there's so many players we can go throughout the years. And, Yeah, I mean, Tebow did stay all 4 years. He was a senior, but
Yeah, but I mean, NIL wise,
he would have been banking in from it, of course. He would have probably made more money as if this is 5 years from now when NIL really gets figured out and 2, 3, 4 million stuff becomes the norm for anybody who's like really good, then yeah, a guy like Tebow who's going to have on top of that salary just the other, because remember, regular NIL deals where brands reach out to you, you go win a Heisman or you're in that conversation or you're just a celebrity in the sport, like a charismatic guy like Manziel or Baker Mayfield, you're going to get commercials. Baker Mayfield would already be in these progressive commercials before he's in the NFL. He would still be doing them as an Oklahoma quarterback. So that's the world we could be living in too. And yeah, so sky's the limit with that. And I don't have a problem with the money. And because think about this, what you said, okay, take Florida State and Miami. I believe that long term, maybe year to year right now, like I would say Miami's ahead of FSU right now in NIL, right? I saw a chart come out that said Florida State was somewhere around like maybe 17th, 18th in the country in how their NIL set up, right? I don't know all what this chart was based on. I think Miami was like 10th or 11th, somewhere in there. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think I saw that same diagram.
I don't know how accurate that was. It kind of made sense to me, at least with Florida State. You're going through, you're like, okay, that makes sense because it's actually higher than I thought. Because I feel like we're in trouble and it's terrible, but it's like, okay, there's like 50, 60 school. Well, there's 100 plus, Division I schools, and I'm in the top 17 of this particular chart, which is NIL competitive. So long term, I think, for example, Florida State and Miami will both be fine in NIL. Okay, once you and I can afford the same players, guess what? It's back to what it was. Now it's recruiting. Now the money's going to be the same, right? If Florida State's paying this much for their 5-star receivers, so is Miami. Shit, so is Bama, right? Because we're getting up there with them eventually. That the going rate for me is pretty much the same at all these big time schools. Now it's back to what it was before. Okay, then why am I going to choose either Miami, Florida State, Ohio State? And it's going to get back to just the other stuff that recruited you. So I think I'm not as worried about it, just this massive bidding war, because I think that if it does become just about dollars and cents, there's actually more teams out there that can compete versus how hard it is to compete now, where Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, they're just going to get all the best recruits. And literally, if you get a recruit, it's because those schools didn't want him. So I mean, that's just the reality. I mean, that's where Florida State is right now. The only way we almost got Travis Hunter last year. And that was kind of an anomaly because he grew up a Florida State fan. And that's why he was committed to us the whole time. But no other player of his caliber. And then he was recruiting a bunch of other guys. So that was different. But realistically right now, nobody who can go to Georgia or Alabama or Ohio State is would come to Florida State right now.
You know what I think is funny? I think it's funny when you have guys like Deion Sanders and Jimbo Fisher step out and says, "Oh, we got this great recruiting class. It has nothing to do with the money." Seriously, get the hell out of here.
Well, remember, the rule is that you can't have enticing NIL deals. So they're thinking, remember, Jimbo grew up in the old NCAA. He knows what it's like to keep stuff hush-hush. So he's probably thinking hey, I'm breaking the rules. I'm buying players with NIL. So I can't just go out there and say, well, yeah, NIL, we incite kids. Most schools have gone the strategy. This is where Miami's unique, right? Most schools have gone the strategy of we're obviously doing this, but we're going to be as non-boastful about it as possible. Right. That's why Miami's making all these people freak out because they see your guy just got this kid. Here's the deal. And it's on Twitter, the freaking deal. We don't know anything about what any of the Texas A&M guys are making. We know what's happening. It's obvious, but we don't know the details. And Miami's revealing those details. And I'm not saying one of those strategies is better than the other because right now where they're not enforcing the rules, Miami's hey, we're technically getting these cleared. So if someone's telling us it's legal, then why can't we tweet about it? Why can't we do this? So let's just do it. And
I think when you put it out, you might get into bidding wars that you don't want to because
exactly.
That's a kid probably would have took 100,000, but now you put it out that you're giving this other kid 300. He might want to reevaluate.
That's why all the holdouts are happening, yeah. Because when deals are public, but here's the thing, they get leaked almost half the time. Apparently, I don't know where this number came from, but apparently we were going to give around $300,000 or more to get that Mims lineman to come down to Florida State. Apparently that was the NIL deal we had cooked up for him. That was never public information, but like apparently that's what everybody knows in the Florida State circle. So that's the word. And that's why they were worried about our other guys going in and saying like, you were going to give this guy 400,000. I started last year. Like I got to be worth something.
Exactly. See, the thing is, it's not necessarily the players or the school or anybody in the organization. It's the agent of those kids that put those numbers out. Because if they could put those numbers out, there's other schools that'll get in contact with them and say, oh, that's what they're paying. That's what the offer is. We'll go above and beyond that. And then the kid will benefit more from that. So the agents are the one that's actually pushing the agenda.
Well, yeah, because I mean, that's what being a good agent is at the pros, right? So that's what pros do in these professions, in these sports. And now agents are a part of college, and that's not illegal anymore. So you got agents, and they're just doing what agents do. So they're coming into this world like, yo, what do you mean you're trying to keep this hush-hush? The way things work is we publicize our deal and then use that as leverage, and other people use that as leverage. And we want to know other people's deals so that we can make leverages with you. Like, that's just what agents do. It would be against their nature to do anything else. Like, that's like the service they're used to doing. So, but then the college league is still supposed to be hush-hush. So it's just another example of all these different worlds colliding in this sport right now, and it's not making sense because, of course, agents should do that.
What that does too, with boosters putting out the amount of money that they're putting into players, it kind of gets some of the other schools to back off those kids, recruiting those kids. Because if I know that my level of boosting is 100,000, and I know that Georgia or Alabama or Miami is offering a kid 300,000, that kid is now officially out of my league. So now I'm not going to recruit him anymore. I'm going to go below or get the bottom feeders because I can't afford to do what they can.
Yeah, I mean, of course, right? You're going to have, but here's the thing. What you still have the ability to do, and this is what other teams do, because there's going to be a cap, right? And think about it. If you want to win a national championship, you have to assemble a roster of talent, right? Every 5-star is going to think he's worth all this money, right? But there's going to be some sort of scale, right? So what these other young schools can do that they don't have enough money to compete with Alabama, yeah, when it comes to putting together a championship roster, but they already don't have that, right now. What they can do that they probably couldn't do before is overpay for a quarterback, right? Alabama, the top schools aren't going to overpay for one specific player, right? But you could be like, hey, let's go get that let's go make that 5-star receiver stay here, right? Like, maybe you're Missouri. Actually, it's funny. Missouri did get a 5-star wide receiver this year. It was one of the anomalies in recruiting. But I don't know if that had anything to do with NIL or not. Maybe it did, right? And maybe if it did have something to do with NIL, it was like, hey, you're local to us. You're a St. Louis guy, and we're going to pay you. We know that the going rate for a receiver of your caliber is like $4 million, $5 million for teams that have to put together a full roster. We're just going to basically pay $12 million for you and not get a lot of other big names, but at least we'll have you, right? There's the opportunity for that to happen too. Obviously, without a salary cap, that can't trickle all the way down, but you can see some of that stuff happening because, I mean, Alabama is not gonna then come back and match that and say, well, we've been paying 5-star quarterbacks like $4 million most years, and it's gone up just a slight inflation with that, and now we're gonna jump to 15 because this school came in with this crazy power move and tried to buy the quarterback. We'll be like, go, okay, we'll replace you with someone who's still pretty good. And that school will get that quarterback. And then what people are just going to look at him. Well, good luck though. You're going to have a quarterback, but only him. But maybe that works because in this sport, all it takes is a quarterback sometimes to really ignite a season and have a team, right? Maybe that's all Pitt was last year was a Kenny Pickett. That's why this year was going to be so fun because we could find out more about them and stuff. But like that can happen. And then maybe you make a playoff run because you bought a quarterback and then you did your recruiting well on the evaluation side, right? You're like a Wisconsin, right? Wisconsin already is way behind talent-wise in all the schools, but they find ways to compete with those schools. They never have like a good quarterback though. So imagine if Wisconsin kept the talent level where they have it, which is still already way below most of those big schools that they go up against and stay competitive with. But then they go pay ridiculous amounts of money to get a quarterback. So they have everything they've had, And now they got this dynamic quarterback, and that's what takes them over the top. And a team like a Wisconsin finally gets into a playoff instead of being that exact same, 9-3, 8-4, 10-2 team every single year. That's like, hey, sometimes they, run the ball really well and go to the Rose Bowl, but like Wisconsin teams look identical, except for that team with Russell Wilson that went to the Rose Bowl and was really dynamic. And, in a 4-team playoff, that team was close to it at least. So I think, and that's what we miss in college football. And I think you can start seeing more of that, right? So if you can get more of the top players to go to different schools than they've been going to, which right now has only been like 3 or 4 of them, if we can get that number to 8, 10, 12 of them, everything's going to trickle down a little bit, right? And yeah, at least we can get back to where we were, which again, remember, where we were was never just vast parity across the sport. Iowa State was never living in the same world as Oklahoma, even if they pretended they did. But, Oklahoma, Texas, all these big brands, I don't need to list them all again. They were all kind of living in the same world, and they would have bad seasons and good seasons, and USC would be really good and they wouldn't. And then Miami would be really good. And you'd have healthy cycles of all these great brands winning titles like basketball still has.
Now I'm gonna make a prediction right now. I could see it now. In a year or two, you're gonna have a list. You're gonna have 5-star, 4-star, 3-star, and then you're gonna have a net worth on the side of it, where each 5-star is worth this much, that 5-star is worth this much, and then you're gonna start seeing colleges make those payments to actually get those 5 stars. It's gonna get crazy. To me, the beginning. This is just the beginning, and it's already a roller coaster.
Yeah.
Right
Well,
now.
let me ask you though, like if the positive scenario, let's say all that happens, and yeah, they're buying players left and right, and that's the future, because I think that is probably what's going to happen. If that results though in like that better scenario I'm talking about, where you basically now have 10 to 15 to 20 teams that are really competitive with each other financially and roster wise, and you fix the problems in the sport we had with like the same team winning it all and all this stuff, would you be happy with that? Like, or would you still be focused on just the fact that that's happening? I don't like that in the sport. Would that still ruin it for you? Because for me, I'm saying if that happens and the on-field product is still great and we get more variety of teams competing for championships at least and competing for their conference championships, I would be more entertained. Like I would like that, I think, and I'd be okay with all this happening. I only wouldn't be okay with it if it made all the problems I hate even worse. And it just, because you combine what we already have where there's not that much parity, and then you throw in and they're buying, and that's causing even more unparity, then it's like, okay, like that, I'll just watch the NFL then.
I think you'll start to see things like, let's just throw a team out there with a lot of money to throw around, like Texas A&M. I think you'll start seeing that where they get so built up on not winning championships, not having any of that, to where they're like, okay, now the money is in factor. We got the money. All the 5-star players out there come to Texas A&M $5 million. It would means nothing to them to pay each player $5 million because they have it.
Mm-hmm.
So then you'll start seeing stuff like that, and it's gonna be like,
but so can Alabama, LSU, Auburn. I mean, how many teams just in the SEC could easily match whatever Texas A&M wants to pay for a player? That's what I'm saying. But right now, think about it. There's only 1 or 2 teams in the SEC that are good. But if we're just going that route, then there's no reason why Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, Auburn, LSU, Texas A&M, I don't know if I'm leaving anyone out, right? But there's 7 right there. All 7 of those schools no one has an advantage over each other in NIL money at those schools. And if they do, it's small, right? Those schools are all on fairly even playing field if we're just talking NIL. So they'll be pretty even with it. And then, like I said, you move up to the Big Ten, you've got we know who the teams are, right? So you're talking about a lot of teams in the country that I think can get a lot better, teams that we want to be better. And that's way more fun than what we have now. So that's why I'm saying if ends up being the result of this, then I'm the biggest fan of this Wild West NIL. If it makes my football better, I'm worried, like I think you are, that it's going to make it worse. And yeah, in that case, I'll freaking hate it and want something done about it, right? But I don't really care what's happening with that. It doesn't bother me that they're making money. It's not going to bother me that because they're making money, there's going to be holdouts and there's going to be.
I think too is like, in certain conferences, you're going to start seeing the teams that's at the top are the ones with the most money, the most to give. And then you're going to see that year in and year out, those other teams in that conference can't beat them. The games aren't going to look as great, or you're not going to watch it after the first or second quarter because it's a blowout. And I think that's the direction that it'll go until those teams actually meet up in the playoffs or whatever. But they would have to literally expand the playoffs. And
well, what you're talking
right
about is
now,
already one of the problems that I don't like, and you're right. But what I think is a bigger driver of that problem isn't NIL; it's the TV contracts with the conferences, right? This is where I'm like, hey, as much as I don't like Miami, like I freaking need you guys to get good again, because I think the only way any ACC team survives long term, unless something changes sometime soon, is we need to get our conference back up on a thing where we can renegotiate our TV deal. Because if we stay in the TV deal we're in through 2036, where every one of us, I don't care if it's Florida State, Miami, Clemson, as big of historical brands as we are all going to take a back seat to every SEC school, because they're already doubling us in revenue. So what college football needed before NIL was for this thing to get figured out. If you're going to have five conferences, then they need to all be in a situation where they're making similar amounts of money, at least from these TV deals and the distribution and or whatever it is. Maybe it's only a power 4 or 6, whatever it ends up being. I don't care, but they need to make a league, right? In the NFL, the NFC East teams don't just pull in hundreds of millions of dollars more than the NFC West or the AFC East, right? That would be, and the salary caps are all the same. And you can't do that in every way in college, because some schools just have built-in advantages that you can never account for, but that's college. But at least you have 5 conferences. They should all be able to like make the same amount of money, do something like that. The way it's going, it's not sustainable. The SEC is already doubling the ACC in revenue on a yearly basis. Vanderbilt makes double what Miami makes from TV money, right? They might not be, and they don't use any of it for football either, right?
nobody watches them either.
And nobody watches them. So think about, as a Florida State fan, I have a freaking problem with that. Vanderbilt makes more money from TV than Florida State. Florida State's a way more valuable TV product than Vanderbilt. But that's how it is with these conferences. So that's not going to be sustainable. If I'm Florida State and I want to compete with the Alabamas and the A&Ms of the world and the LSUs, I can't do it. The Big Ten is the only other conference that financially is doing that with their TV deal. They actually might pass the SEC when they re-sign, because it's like a year away. But then the SEC is going to get a new one when Texas and Oklahoma come in, and it's going to be even more. And we don't get to even talk about changing ours until 2036. But there's not going to be an ACC by 2036 that we know, if we don't get a grip on this, right? So that's where
my thing too is,
NIL could expand that, because they're going to have more money than us. So, but at least it'll all be even in the SEC. But we're not going to be able to compete long term. Like every year, it's going to get
like the
more
way I
and
see it
more
with
away.
the ACC right now, like with the whole NIL thing, you can start predicting it. The way Miami's putting money into recruiting, into NIL, you're going to have Miami coming out of the coastal because they're going to have the best talent because they can afford to get them. Then on the Atlantic side, whoever on that side decides that, hey, we're going to go full in on NIL, we're going to go full in on talent, that team is going to basically be playing against Miami every single year, because the talent gap is going to be so large.
And the only teams that can afford financially to do that are Florida State, Clemson, if they choose. Again, all these teams have to choose, but could, if they went all in, have the finances. Maybe North Carolina a little bit. And then even on your guys' side, like Virginia Tech has the ability, if they really want to get in this game a little bit too, right? And who knows, maybe Pitt, if they had a good season last year, there's more fan interest. Maybe they put together a collective and people are giving to that too. Like, we don't know where it's going to go. But yeah, based on right now, Miami's ahead of everyone in their division, probably ahead of everyone in the ACC when it comes to what they're doing with NIL. Clemson's kind of like not really there, but it's not affecting them as much. They're still recruiting fairly well. I know Florida State's trying. I feel like North Carolina will, because I know they have to in basketball and have been in basketball. So they've been getting better at football, and North Carolina is a state with a ton of talent. Like NC State is predicted to win our division this year, and they were pretty good last year. So, and we just need teams to get better so that better players come here and we get that money. Because, like I said, like a lot of the Miami fans are like, "Oh, we're safe." I was making this argument in a space a couple weeks ago with them. And just like, hey, guys, long term for the sport, if we want to keep Florida State rivalry a national rivalry, like ACC needs to come up or we're screwed. And they were like, oh, it doesn't. Basically, they were like, we have so much money because the way our boosters are paying that's not going to affect us. We're a private school. And it's like, look, I get that. I'm glad you have the boosters and they're going to take care of things. But that's still a crap load of money that you could be getting every year that you won't be getting. And there's SEC teams that have just as much booster money as you guys, Miami. Like those teams exist out there. Only they're making all this extra TV money. So when you're just comparing yourselves to those guys, you're still getting trounced in revenue. And it's not sustainable. Even if you are lucky enough to have these big time boosters that they keep up with you, right? Baylor is like another Miami, right? They're privately funded and they pay a lot of money for their coaches and stuff, even though they're a small private school. But if the Big 12 is getting dominated in TV deals, they're going to be in the same position. And I, as a fan, like, I want to see all 5 of the conferences semi-evenly represented. I like, that's better. I don't want it to be where it's the SEC and everybody else, to the point where literally, like we talked about NIL creating basically farm teams. And if you can't afford the best of the best, you're always just going to be handing your good players to them. And the tier below you is going to be handing up. Like, we don't want to see NIL cause that. That wouldn't be good. Well, we're about to see that in conferences if these TV deals don't get figured out. That's what it's going to be. It's not going to be a farm of moving the best play. It's going to be like, hey, the SEC is the best conference. The Big Ten's the second. And every good Big Ten player is going to leave for the SEC if they get a chance. And every good ACC player is going to leave for the Big Ten or the SEC if they get a chance. It's going to be no questions asked that way. And that's going to be even more frustrating than the whole thing happening with teams and moving up, because at that point you won't even have the league that we recognize. It's just going to be the SEC league. And that's why a lot of people think this 50, maybe 45 or 60 super team is in the future. When SEC went and got Oklahoma and Texas, that made shit really real. And SEC's thinking long term. And that's why I think the sport needs a commissioner, like the NFL has. Someone that's like, hey, my job is to protect the integrity of just the entire sport. Because think about it, the SEC, you can't blame them. They only care about the SEC and their teams. They don't give a damn about anything else. That's literally not his job. The guy's job is to do what's ever best for the SEC. And for them, probably having a super league where they dominate the sport is the best thing for them. So, of course, they're going to go for that. That's why it would be nice if there was a head of the sport, a college football commissioner, that was like, no. It's actually unhealthy for our sport if Texas and Oklahoma leave the Big 12 and the SEC gets that more dominant. You guys are staying put. Maybe if you want more money, we're going to give the Big 12 a better contract or something like that. Or it'd be nice if college football was just one league, kind of like the NFL, that had all these different contracts, but every NFL team makes the same amount of money from TV deals. You don't have Patriots or the AFC West making $5 million more per year or some crazy number than another NFL team. So they should do it more like that. But who's going to step up and do that at this point? The NCAA is nowhere to be found. There are high level people, the schools even, that are talking about creating like a college football constitution. But these are all just things of the future. We don't know where it's going to go. And it could go in a really good direction in some of the ways I've described, or it could go in this disastrous direction where it becomes this sport that, frankly, I wouldn't really care about much anymore at that point. I'll just watch the NFL. But yeah, who knows where it's going to go.
Yeah, I could see headlines now. Cornerback transfers to this school, NIL deal, $1 million. Then you have the kids on the team already that's not getting $1 million, or, well, he's getting $1 million. I deserve $1 million. And then boom, transfer portal threats and stuff like that's going to be coming down the line. Well, if you're going to bring him in and I'm just as good as him and he's getting $1 million, I'm going to go somewhere else where I could get that $1 million. And then it's going to be a mess.
But here's the thing. As long as most of those deals happen down the ladder, I think that's positive. So let's say you go to a school and you're like, I think I'm worth more. As long as that school's most of the time is right, no, you're worth. So if you do want to transfer, you're going to have to go to a school that's quote unquote not as good as us, right? Think about it. If any Alabama player outside of Bryce Young, right, right now, and maybe Allen, right, their DN, those are the only two guys that have the power to go to Alabama and be like, hey, we're looking for money, more money. And who's going to pay them more money? Maybe two schools. Okay, Ohio State, Georgia, maybe like you just, right, you can't even see that happening. And if someone who's like not as high up the depth chart in Alabama is being poached, Alabama would either, if he was worth it to them, they're gonna match that, or they're gonna say, dude, no, that's go play for West Virginia if you want $8 million, because we're not paying one of our corners $8 million, but maybe West Virginia is, whatever, that's them. We're gonna go, so. But again, if it's the other way around, like with Gibbs and Patterson, where it's like, hey, we're Alabama, we are really, really good, but we actually kind of need a running back right now. So we're just going to go steal the best player from this other team. If that's what we're seeing happen more often than not, that sucks. If it's the other way I described, I think that's good. I want to see more of those transfers.
Yeah, I also see it being a social media problem too, because the most popular, you got to be basically popular with these NIL things. The more
Well,
followers
that
you
was
have,
the idea, right? But I don't think now that's the case. Maybe to make boom in NIL bucks, right? Right now, like if you are actually a celebrity, then obviously you're still worth a bunch of money to the school's collective and whoever recruited you and gave you that NIL deal to come to the school. But now you're worth even more just in the open market, right? And that's what's weird about the collectives, right? And why you're going to see this, because a collective buys your NIL rights. That's why doing it without a collective can have its pros and cons. The pros to a collective is usually they're basically saying you're coming to this school to do that. And it's a little more easy to enforce that. When you don't have a collective, the nice thing is you're just giving maybe one specific deal. We bought you with this deal. That's kind of what Miami has, right? The wallet guy is essentially buying most of the players, giving them deals to come to school, but they can also get other deals with other people, right? Like the basketball player you guys said that came back, basically the wallet guy told him like, hey, I'm not changing your wallet deal, but we're going to find you more NIL money, like someone else will come in and you'll get another deal, right? So where the way collectives work is they kind of bargain for the price up front. The collective says, hey, we will give you, like that quarterback at Tennessee. The rumors are that his deal is that he got $8 million over a 3-year period starting now to go play football at Tennessee for those years. Right now, that's a lot of money. That's like what, $2 million a year or something like that. So basically, that's his salary that he's on a 4-year contract with that collective with, right?
yeah, probably around 2.3.
But he's gonna, if he's amazing for Tennessee, he could, say, hey, I think I'm worth more than that because they own his NIL rights. And even if he becomes a Heisman Trophy winner and some brand wants to pay him $15 million for one commercial, he doesn't get any of that. The collective gets that back. They make that off of him. Now, obviously, he's going to be like, that's ridiculous. I'm going to go to another, like maybe another school pays me more. But that's kind of the one thing about collectives is you sign away your NIL rights, and whatever they pay you, that's your NIL for college, because they invested in you. They say, hey, if you give us your NIL rights, we'll give you $400,000, and you have to come play at this school for 3 years at least.
Now, if you're an NFL owner, agent, commissioner, or whatever, you got to be looking at this NIL thing like, oh man, our contracts are going to be inflated now, because a kid in college could make 10 million, 11 million, 12 million, whatever, just based off their name and likeness and whatever people are willing to give them, through advertisement or whatever it may be. Now you come to the NFL with a rookie contract of $3 million, it means nothing to them. It's going to mean nothing to them.
But see, I don't think that can happen, because again, there's going to be a unique type of player, right? Like the Tebow, the Manziel that we talked about, that is worth more money in college than in the NFL, right? Tim Tebow was a college celebrity because he was really good on a really good team. In the NFL, he was worth what he was worth. So it's weird and it's awkward that some players might actually go from making more money to less money, when for the vast majority, it's going to be reverse of that. They're going to go from making less money to way more money. But yeah, it's very possible that what you're worth just in a free market type world to a college that's about to win a national championship or be really competitive, and you're a big reason why, you might be worth, I mean, there's a lot of money in college football. It's not quite the NFL, but it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. So there's clearly money at some of these programs. Be like, yeah, you're worth $3 million to us this year. And Jordan Addison might be worth $3-4 million to us this year and the value that he brings. But let's say he was a receiver that was like smaller, and even though he was going to tear it up for you in college, right? Like maybe like a Peter Warwick at Florida State, a guy that we used to have, right? Like these guys that are like electrifying, crazy college receivers, dynamic players, but maybe the draft is like, hey, we think he's like a second rounder or maybe a third rounder. Well, he's worth more in that college game than he is in the NFL. That doesn't mean it's going to inflate the NFL salaries, because they're based on a totally different set of things. Those salaries are based on the revenue in that sport, which is a different sport than college football. So
I want to put a link in the chat. So for anybody that wants to come on in and chime in on the conversation, have any questions, you can do so. So I will put the link in the chat, because I kind of want to hear what their thoughts are, or some of their concerns, or some of their questions, or where college football is heading with this NIL stuff. I see it. It's going to be pay for play. It's inevitable.
It is pay for play already. Like it's not going that direction. We are in pay for play, just not everybody's doing it yet. And probably 2-3 years from now, we're at a point where everybody's either doing what Texas A&M is doing with the collective, or everybody's doing what Miami's doing, but it's out in the open. And the question is that going to normalize everything once it all settles down and we figure it out, or is it going to turn it into like a sport we don't recognize?
What it's going to also be too, you're going to start seeing headlines of kids not, paying attention to the money, and then you're going to see headlines where IRS is involved now because this kid didn't pay taxes or didn't, got the money and just spend it all. It's going to be a mess, man.
Another thing though is it might make, again, because let's say you're coming back and making money, you're going to take more risks, and that's a good thing. Like we talked about the seniors coming back for more fifth years, especially if they didn't get really big draft grades. Think about it. You're also going to see more players playing bowl games, right? Because I'm already making a crap load of money. I'm not as worried about sitting out because I wasn't allowed to have a penny before, and now I might go make money. So especially if you are like a player that's almost worth more in college than you are in the pros, you're going to keep playing. So it could fix, again, if it fixes all the issues that I already had with college football before NIL, because it was headed towards a dark place already. Forget NIL. It was headed towards like come on, I'm not liking what I'm seeing here in a lot of different ways. If NIL ends up correcting that, if it makes all the bowl games more competitive, I don't need to list all the problems again, but if it fixes all those, then I'm like, I love the NIL, and I don't care if it's done through these crazy deals and the way it's happening and the bidding wars. That part doesn't bother me.
But what I think is going to happen is you're going to start to see, a lot of parity or whatever, but you're going to get the teams like the Alabamas and that don't have that extra advantage that they do now. They're going to say, okay, let's up the antics. Let's just say everybody's offering 10. Let's offer 20 now. Let's get us back to the head of the college football, to where now we're the front runners and everybody's trying to play catch up again.
But then Ohio State can do the same thing the next day. And that's what I'm saying, is financially, it's not like Alabama has this unlimited button of money to pull out of that no one else does. Yeah, they're not all the same. A lot of schools have bigger bags to reach into than other schools. But like I've been saying the whole time, there's enough schools at the top that their bags are just as deep as each other. So
right, and I think
Alabama, do all you want. Go pay 20, go pay 30. Like if I'm at least LSU, I'm like, Alabama, anything you do, I can do with money. But there's only one Nick Saban, right? There's only one Nick Saban.
The teams with the deeper pockets are the ones that you're going to start seeing every playoffs. If you put it to 12 teams, you're going to have that same 12 teams every year. And then it's going to get to the point where somebody within those 12 is going to say, hey, I got to get ahead of those other 11. So maybe this year with a surprise shock on signing day, you see all these kids go to this one school because they talk to the agent and say, "Look, whatever they're offering, we're gonna double it. Sign to us and keep it a hush. You're making your
Well,
money."
the
And
main
then
question
boom.
is it going to get worse than it is now with the issues you're talking about? Because
Absolutely.
I don't think so, because they're already, I don't think they can get any worse than they are now. Like, we only have 2, maybe 3, if we're super lucky, 4 teams that are even in the college football national championship discussion preseason every year. We know who they are every time.
I
How
think
could it get worse than that? Like,
one
it's
thing I can
now.
see it getting worse is the SEC. Like you said, with the TV deals and everything going on, they have more money to flex. So you might end up seeing a playoffs where if it's 4 teams, you might end up seeing like 3 SEC teams in it and stuff like that.
Well, exactly. My point though is that forget NIL because of the unfairness and like the lack of even money in the TV deals. That's already happening. And I don't like that, and it's been very bad. And that's what I'm saying though. What NIL can do, because if financially right now, when it comes to just buying rosters, Florida States and Clemson's and other Big Ten schools can compete with the SEC, then what they're going to be able to do by making their schools better. If Miami had 10 win seasons and Florida State did right now too, and Clemson was still doing pretty good, then the ACC would have way more leverage to go to ESPN and fix the TV deal, right? It's the worst timing that Florida State fell off when we did. If we still had that Florida State Clemson game every year being like a top 5, top 10 matchup where the winner goes to the ACC championship game, remember from 2009 through like 2019, the winner of the Florida State Clemson game played in the ACC championship game. And from 12 to present, or outside this last year, the winner of that game won the conference. So that was this primetime game. The Florida State Clemson games from like that last decade before Florida State fell off these last 4 years were incredible and big time matchups. So if that was still happening and Miami got what they're doing and they got back in that level, and you had the Florida State Miami game being what it was in the 90s and stuff and what everybody wants it to be, then that TV product just from those 2 games alone every year is going to make the ACC worth way more. Combine that with, Virginia Tech, maybe North Carolina, some of these other teams stepping up. And again, everybody follows the leader. So Alabama was this clear and away program in the SEC. Everybody rose up to try to catch them, right? We need the ACC to do the same thing. It might never be quite the SEC, but it just, we don't need to make as much money as them, but we need to be a lot closer than we are now. And, same in the other conferences, right? Big Ten has done a pretty good job. And I think the ACC is capable. Like, we have the brands and the teams capable of playing the way the Big Ten plays at the very least, right? Where you have, like, I would say Ohio State, let's say they're the Clemson, then you got like Michigan and Penn State, it could be the Florida State Miamis, and then you get Wisconsin still always, making noise. Iowa's making noise. We need the Virginia Techs and the North Carolinas to start consistently staying at that level. And then all of a sudden we've got a big thing. And gosh, if we could ever somehow, it's never going to happen, but if we could ever somehow get Notre Dame in, then we're really changing things here. That's wishful
Let me
thinking.
ask you a question because it's arrived on this channel a lot.
Yeah.
Expanding the ACC, Notre Dame coming in and possibly in West Virginia. What's your take on that?
So as a fan, I've always wanted West Virginia in the ACC. It goes back to when we started bringing in a lot of Big East teams. So I was pretty young when Miami was Big East. So I still think of most of the Big East teams that came over with you guys. To me, that's what the ACC is, right? Virginia Tech, Miami, Boston College, it's all ACC. And the Big East I grew up watching was more, West Virginia, Louisville was always that battle. And then, of course, I knew, and West Virginia and Virginia Tech and Miami and Syracuse and Boston College all have this history too, because they all used to be Big East. So when we brought in, finally, after bringing in you guys and Virginia Tech and the Boston College, when we finally brought in Louisville and Clemson, I really wanted to see that West Virginia Louisville game get played again all the time. And then I thought, for Florida State, like Morgantown, that's such a perfect ACC like location, right? Because they're a wild fan base. It's like Virginia Tech, right? Like that's a place where not the biggest stadium, not quite SEC, but rabid fan base, passionate, right? Like when I think of the ACC schools that are like SEC programs as far as passion, obviously I think of Florida State, Clemson, Miami. Not as much Miami on like the stadium environment necessarily because the whole Hard Rock thing, but like think about NC State, North Carolina, Virginia Tech, especially. Those are like rockin' crazy stadiums with crazy fan bases. And if you go play a night game there, it's epic. So if those teams were good, those primetime matchups would be epic. And that's what the ACC really needs. And West Virginia would do so much better in the ACC, I think. West Virginia went to the Big 12 and they're just at such a recruiting disadvantage. Did you know that West Virginia is like over 1,000 miles away from the closest school they play? In recruiting, that matters. You're basically telling parents and like anyone local, like you're basically going to miss every road game. That's a big deal, right? So, and then for recruiting, that's huge. If West Virginia was back in the ACC, they're right back in their home. They're playing Virginia Tech, other Virginia schools that border them. They're playing North Carolina States. Like everything is so much closer, and that would just be a way bigger deal. So I think they could get better in the ACC. I think they'd be a fun ACC school. And obviously Notre Dame would be phenomenal for the ACC. To me, that's just almost impossible. It's not going to happen. But yes, when you talk about expanding the ACC, if you're expanding to Notre Dame and maybe West Virginia, then yes, I'm fine with it. Even though West Virginia isn't as much of a moneymaker as Notre Dame, but regardless, you don't expand just to expand. So you don't go take TCU and you wouldn't go take like UCF. Like you don't just expand to add teams. I think what we're seeing now that's obvious is you would need it to be brands that helped you. You're not going to catch the SEC, obviously, but helped you get a little closer, right? The SEC the reason they're the best is they have a ton of huge, big, wild brands that care so much about football. And they all happen to be the same conference. And the ACC only has like 3 of them or 4 of them, maybe. So, or maybe a little more, but so you need more of those. Notre Dame would be adding like a 4th or a 5th one to that. That would be one of school of that caliber is a big deal. That's why the SEC getting Texas and Oklahoma on top of what they already have is just like you're starting to see the writing on the wall. And like this ain't sustainable. It's not going to.
We got a question here from Vortex Sports Network. He says, to be honest, FSU and Miami should be in the SEC. What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, it just depends. They're asking in this current, the way things are going. Like, yeah, like back in the day, like the way the conferences were lining up, it made sense. Like conferences were small. So Florida State went to the ACC when there was like 9 teams. Miami went to this Big East when there was like 9, and then eventually went to 10 teams. The SEC was only 9 to 10 teams, and it was not power. As the conferences have grown, that's where you've seen this power struggle thing happen. And yeah, it's going to be this thing where Florida State, Miami, Clemson, maybe Virginia Tech should all approach the SEC and be like, dude, come on, we're one of you. Like our fan bases belong with your fan bases. Let's do it. But at that point, I mean, the SEC is already so. You saw what doing Texas and Oklahoma and bringing them in did. If they brought in Clemson, Florida State, like if that was even allowed, then you're just going that super team thing that we're talking about. So basically, the next conference moves, if there's moves of that level where that big of brands move to the SEC again after what we just saw, that would just spark the whole, okay, we got to go super team thing. Then Ohio State's like, we're not staying in the Big Ten because if it's SEC is basically its own league and we're Ohio State, we play for national championships. We're coming there. USC would have to come. Hey, we're USC. Like any school that thought they were capable would have to come. On a realistic note, though, we're not allowed to get out of the ACC until 2036. This is why nobody's talked about this. If we were like renegotiating our contract in 2 years,
what is the penalty? What is the amount?
It's I forget the exact dollar amount, but it's astronomical and it's not going to happen. Like it's so ridiculous that we wouldn't do it. Think about this. Oklahoma and Texas won't even pay their fees to get out early because they're pretty freaking high. I think it's like $400 to $500 something million per school that they would have to pay. And they're not doing that. And that's to get out of 2 or 3 more years. So imagine what the Florida State, Clemson, Miami numbers would be if we wanted to get out of this thing like what, over 10 years early. like 2036. It's not even 2026. So we got like 13 years of this contract left. So I think the price is just like, it's something that doesn't even make sense. It's not possible. And that's where we're at right now. And that's what sucks because, yeah, I think actually if Florida State, Miami, Clemson were like really close to the end of their deals, they'd be saying, hey, we're planning to leave also for the SEC in 2025 or 26 or whatever. Right. And then maybe Ohio State and them jump in, or who knows what would happen then. But the only reason that's not been on the table, I guarantee you, is because literally we can't. So they got to renegotiate the TV deal. It's as simple as that. I think it's the bigger issue in the sport than NIL. If you're talking about long term.
Okay, so from what I'm seeing here, the ACC has an exit fee to leave the conference set right now at $52 million. So if a school wanted to get out of the conference right now, they would have to pay $52 million. If Miami wanted to do that, we could.
Dude,
I think if Florida State wanted to do, they could.
That's so much. No, I know we couldn't do that because I know we're in financial situations right now. Because 52 million. I don't think you're realizing how much money that is. Like
for the boosters that we have, we got a guy right now that's a $32 billion guy. If they came to him with this proposition, he would actually do it.
Maybe
he's actually talking about building us a $500 million stadium.
Yeah, I saw that, which I wouldn't mind, by the way. I think Miami being a small school, like just student body wise and stuff, even though it's weird, there've actually been a ton of pushback against this. I thought it was kind of a no brainer. Like, yeah, that'd be kind of awesome if they got an on campus stadium again. Like, I'm not saying they need that or they need that to compete, but I just as a fan, I'm like, yeah, that'd be cool, right? Don't Miami fans want that? But when I'm in those spaces, I realize a lot of them are like, oh, that's so stupid. Hard Rock's awesome, and we don't need a stupid on-campus stadium and blah blah blah. So, which I was a little surprised by. I think a smaller, like try to kind of rebuild something like the old Orange Bowl, but just obviously way more high tech. Something like Baylor Stadium, right? Just a new modern like 6 stadium, call it the Orange Bowl again. I think if Miami had something like that on campus, and because it maybe didn't hold as many people, it's not going to be like 100,000 seat stadium. Maybe it's like a 45,000 seat stadium, but it's loud and it's rocking and it's crazy. I mean, that I think that'd be awesome. But I guess a lot of Miami fans want to stay at Hard Rock. So I don't know how you feel about that, but.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out the buyout for Texas and so to leave the Big 12 right now, Texas and Oklahoma would have to pay $76 million each. So their buyout is actually bigger than ours.
Yeah, and think about it. They don't want to pay that. They were like, we would rather stay. And the Big 12 doesn't want to make a deal with them because they're like, screw you. We're going to make you pay every dime until you leave early.
The thing with their deal, too, is ESPN would actually make that payment, but then the Big 12 actually stepped in and, kind of put ESPN on lawsuit notice.
Yeah, because they're basically like, how is this not a type of tampering, right? Because, ESPN's paying us, but they're the ones technically benefiting from the move because of what that's going to do for the SEC, and then they still own. Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of, and think about it, ACC is the same way. ESPN owns us too. So.
Yeah, so I think for the conference wise, the way Miami's going about NIL deal, we're going to get the talent because the kids are going to come. Now, that's going to push us ahead. I'm not sure what the rest of the conference is going to do, but I think that, you guys should probably get on board ahead of Clemson if you guys want to actually.
Well, if Miami is really good, I think Florida State will have no selfish choice. Like, right, we're rivals. We hate each other. And there's no way I think they're going to stand by and watch Miami start having more success than us and I think that'll make them get more irrational with their money and they'll start doing literally whatever it takes. So that's why I'm like, hey, go for it, Miami. Like if that's what it takes for us to get back on track. See, what happened at Florida State was, and this is why Jimbo Fisher left. He was calling all of these problems out years ago. He was at Florida State. We just won a national championship. He built the program up to a great standard. He said, hey, we still have a lot of work to do. Alabama and A&M are throwing money at things that we are not. Clemson's doing things that we are not. Okay. And boosters didn't want to listen to him. They're like, okay, I mean, yeah, we might get you a players only facility, but we're good right now. We just want a freaking championship. We're on top. Miami's down. Florida's down. And Jimbo's like, I don't care that they're down. We got to keep them down. We got to, put the foot on the throat. And they all got soft on him. And that's why the last 3 years that he was there, he was almost negotiating to leave and finally goes to Texas A&M because he knew if I'm going to keep winning national championships, I have to be at a place where the money is just pouring in and everybody's buying football. And if Alabama does something, we do that. It doesn't matter if we're doing really good right now and you think, well, do we really need that? We just won a national title. Yes, because Bama and A&M and Oregon and they're throwing the money at that, and we're going to lose this giant war.
And I think if your guys' administration is not paying attention to the way things are going right now, they obviously are clueless, because if you let Miami goes out, get all these top players, they're going to start winning at a high level, and then you're going to be playing catch up.
Oh, exactly. Well, we already are, man. I mean,
now. So instead of waiting for it to escalate, go ahead and get it done now.
Well, yeah. So, and I think what happened with Jimbo has woken them up, because basically they're like, oh, that dude was freaking right. Yeah, it was that quick. It can all fall apart. Jimbo leaves, and you've seen us lately, right? Like from day one, Taggart came in. Now, Taggart had in the beginning a better roster than Norvell had, but he was terrible. He didn't know how to run a program. He brought guys in that had no business coaching at this level. It was a disaster. They lost the locker room. Huge mess, right? Obviously. So we abandoned him after 2 years. It's a sinking ship. Well, the problem is that sets your roster back even further. 2 coaches and like, no, that's just terrible from a roster standpoint. So Mike, who I don't know how I quite feel about him yet, but I do know for a fact he's done way more than Taggart. The record has been similar, but if you're a fan and you watch, I think it's obvious, like he's done more with less. The players actually go and play. In college football, it's important when the team like wants to be there and wants to play for their coach. And even though we started 0-4 last year and had that terrible Jacksonville State game, if that was Jimbo's last year or any Willie Taggart team, the team would have we would have went, like 1-10 or 1-11 after that, because they wouldn't have even showed up. But that team, after 0-4, they literally were still like fighting to be in games. They're just really bad, but they were playing hard. And then we're playing you guys tough at the end of the season, and like the kids care. They still care about the Miami game. So I do like that part of Norvell, but I don't know, because it all just depends. And NIL is changing a lot of things. Like I said, that chart had us like 17th. I think we know and we're aware, but we are dealing with financial struggles because of what happened with Taggart, right? I mean, we're still paying double coaching salary. Like we got money, like we're good, but there's a couple things like holding us back from like being top dogs, because we're not as rich as some of the other schools right now. And it's going to take a couple of years. But if we abandon ship on a coach again, financially, we're even further steps. So it's like we're kind of at a place where I don't know if like Norvell would literally have to go like 4-8 this year again if we were going to fire him. Like he goes 6-6 or 7-5, even though it's not good enough. Like he's not getting fired. Like Florida State.
I think if you guys fire him, you're going to actually dig yourself in a deeper hole.
Exactly. We would just dig ourselves in a deeper hole. And that's the risk you took when you got rid of Taggart so fast. Now, I was on board with that decision. I think it was that bad. But part of the risk of getting rid of a coach after 2 years, almost less than 2 years, is you really have no choice but to be successful with the next guy, or at least give him a lot more time, because you're not going to be able to afford to do that again. So
right, and then you kind of send a bad message towards all the other coaches out there. Like, hey, if I take the Florida State job, I'll be fired in 2 years.
Yeah, you can't have that back to back.
I won't even have a chance to get a good 3-4 years of recruiting, and then put my guys out there in that 5th year or whatever.
Well, it was also terrible timing. Like, for example, when Willie came in, that was the first year of the early signing period. And even though on paper it looked like he pulled some guys in, like they were terrible. Like it was by that time, there's a reason those players are still left. The good ones get it done, most of them, in that early signing period, right? So, and then when Norvell came in, like you're dealing with the depleted Taggart roster that wasn't talented, but it's even worse now. There's basically like I said, we had one draft pick this year. Like the average player just isn't even what I would consider like ACC caliber. And it's, I think this last year we were a little better than the year before. 2020 was just like those kids just didn't belong at D1, a lot of them. But you had to put a team together. You had COVID happen and the early signing period. Like it's just transitioning coaching is harder than it used to be because of the early signing period, because you're usually getting your job the very end of November, early December, and then December 18th, you're supposed to sign most of your recruiting class. So you lose out on an entire recruiting class as soon as you switch coaches, pretty much in most cases. Then you got to come in and develop relationships and recruit. But if you're Norvell, right? Oh, well, then it's COVID year. So I came in with nobody that I was able to recruit. And now COVID, the year I can't go develop relationships, that's terrible for a roster like ours, right? All the big schools that do good in recruiting, they benefited from the COVID thing more than the other schools that really relied on that whole go make relationships with people. So then, yeah, in 2022, we were putting together a good recruiting class, but then we didn't pull off enough wins to convince a lot of those elite guys to come. So we got to take a baby step and hopefully make a little bit of improvement next year. Hopefully, I'm hoping for like 7-5 minimum, like go 7-5. If we're lucky, maybe 8-4. And I think that would be enough improvement to start getting an upgrade in the recruiting, like an upgrade of the type of players we want. And then maybe you have a 9-win season soon. And like, so it's baby steps, but that's our only path out of this. Getting rid of Norvell would just set us back.
The problem with the baby steps is with the way NIL is, if you take baby steps, then the boosters will come back on board. But the longer you take, the worse it's going to be recruiting wise.
Well, I mean, NIL, right, could have you speed that up, I think, because without NIL, it's simply just like if you want to recruit at a Georgia, Bama level, you got to start winning as many games as them. That's really hard. Like, how would you do that in this era? But with NIL, I might be able to buy just as good players with some of them. What was that?
Georgia and Alabama, they actually did it the opposite. They recruited first. It all comes down to recruiting first, because with Georgia, they didn't get to the level that they are now because they was basically bringing in top 5 classes for the last 5 years. So now you see them on the top level because of those top-notch players that
but Georgia, when Kirby took over Georgia, they were already at a fairly competitive roster position. They maybe weren't like they were a decent team, way more talented than like what Florida State was at the end of Taggart coming into Norvell. And so there's no choice there. I mean, you're right. You recruit first. When Jimbo finally took over as head coach, like we immediately, 2010, his first year, that was like, I think we had the number 1 or 2 recruiting class that year. We had a top 3 class for like 4 or 5 years straight. Exactly. And it was an instant kind of turnaround. But right now, we've entered an era where there's not that hype when you come in as a coach and instantly get those recruits. There's like Jimbo kind of at A&M, and like I remember Alabama, Saban, like immediately in 2008, that first class he had a freshman, Julio Jones, Mark Ingram, like just studs everywhere, right? And
that's what I'm saying with the whole NIL thing.
With NIL, I feel like you can speed up because right now, you are not going to match a recruiting class like Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Clemson, unless you win a lot of football games. You have to go win 10, 11 games before those kids start considering you. And that almost seems impossible because how do you win 10 or 11 games without some of those kids? That's the era we enter where NIL might make you be able to buy the kids. And it's a lot easier to get them with money. Like, hey, we can buy our roster. So I think you actually with NIL have opportunities to catch up on recruiting faster than you did before, where you literally had to rely on hype and maybe the media helping with that hype and going to kids and being like, I'm this new coach in town and I'm here to recruit. And sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't. Now you can just say like, hey, forget all that. Like I have at least money to compete with anyone else in the country. And there's a lot of teams that can.
So right? I'm saying, with that being said, I think, if your boosters not paying attention, they're going to lose out. Because if they're not putting the money behind, NIL now, all the other schools that are going to get that advantage in recruiting. So if you have kids that's saying, okay, my top 5 is Florida State, Miami, the Gators, or whoever else you want to add on there, when it comes down to it, who's going to entice them the most with NIL deals? Plus, hey, we got these players coming in, that player coming in because we're paying them. We got this class. We're putting you in the opportunity to where you can win a lot of games and you could get seen a lot more because your teammates are just as good as you are. Because what you'll start seeing is, okay, Miami's paying players, Miami's paying NIL deals. They're getting the 4 or 5 stars. The teams that are not, they'll settle for what's left.
Oh, yeah, exactly. But that's why I think you're going to have an arsenal of 10, 20, maybe 30 teams that are going to be close to each other in that financial competitiveness. And they might not, they're not all going to be at the same time, right? So, like I said, last year, there was basically 2 or 3 teams that had NIL figured out and used it to their advantage, right? 2 years ago, or like, so the recruiting class before this last one, basically Georgia and Texas A&M, they were already on top of it. That's what everyone was saying. They knew how to get it done. Georgia was even doing it, right? And so as Alabama before it was legal, right? They were, a lot of these programs were ahead of the game in that way. So they already had it figured out. Okay, well, now it's only year 2. Year 2 of recruiting just happened. And think about the bombshells that happened. It sucked for Florida State, but the Travis Hunter thing, right? Oh my gosh, a guy left Florida State, like a Division I powerhouse brand school, to go to a HBCU. Like that was unheard of before. That's insane. And that happened. The best player in the country, the number 1 overall recruit. So we're not even talking about like, oh, a smaller ACC school came in and stole a big time player. We're talking about not even if a Division I school stole the number 1 player. So there's a lot of schools that I think can compete at that level, like with the finances. And next year, it's going to be more teams. So yeah, Miami's ahead of Florida State this year with NIL because this is moving at different speeds for every school who's kind of accepting this new reality we're in. It's only just started. So by next year, you're going to have 5 times as many teams with their NIL completely figured out by the time recruiting goes as this year. The year after that, it's going to be more. And 2, 3, 4 years from now, all of the major schools that are anything close to major right now are all going to be on the same page with what NIL costs and how much players cost. And if they can afford it, they're going to go get it and get it done. So that I have faith in that will happen.
Yeah, my thing is with any school in the ACC, whether it's Florida State, Miami, or whoever, I think if Miami is going 100 miles an hour with recruiting, with NIL, and Florida State is going 50, obviously we're going to get to the finish line first.
Yeah, but it just depends on how many years, right? If let's say Miami's at, I don't know, do you think if Miami's at 100% right now, would you say that, or 80%, or they're high? And Florida State's only at 60% right now. As long as by next year they get to 70, 80%, also, you just can't let 4 or 5 years go by. But even if you do let 4 or 5 years go by before you match, hypothetically, at least on paper financially, the day you do decide to match and get up to 100%, you're in the same boat as them with money. And now you're not going to lose recruits because of money anymore. Like I said, Florida State, Miami, we're going to be battling for recruits. We always have our whole history. And there's been different advantages. We've had better coaches and better recruiting staffs. You guys have. There's been pass-offs. Well, NIL is going to be the same way. If you guys are more ahead on NIL right now, then this year, maybe next year, we're going to lose that battle with you guys in recruiting. But one day, we're going to match it. And then as soon as we match it, at least financially, hey, we're not going to lose any recruits to Miami because of money. We'll pay as much as they will, or at least what we're willing to pay for those players. We're fine there. But there's still other things, right? All the other recruiting factors are going to come back in because of that. Because in this early stage, it's going to be all money because you're going to have a lot of schools doing it and even more that aren't doing it. But eventually, they're all going to be doing it. And yeah, some will outbid each other. But again, think about the way you outbid. If you're Alabama, you're at the top, you want to put together a full roster. Look at the NFL, the Patriots, right? They're like, we have the best coach. We can win. We don't need to overpay for players. And they don't, right? They don't at all. And then other teams sometimes have to pay a quarterback this insane amount of money. He may be the highest paid guy, but they're not even that good of a team. Like that happens too. So you're going to be able to like put a lot of parity behind these rosters, I think, if NIL is handled the right way.
If they could get it to where it's like 12 teams or 20 teams, like you said, that's competing. Any one of those teams could actually win a championship every year. I'll take it. But being the fan that I am selfish. I'm just hoping that this NIL thing stays an advantage to us and, propel us to hit the reset button on the national championship.
Well, dude, that's why I'm telling you a way bigger deal than NIL is the conference misalignment with TV deals, because that now NIL might be the only thing that prolongs that for Miami, maybe longer than it will other schools. But at the end of the day, because everyone is going to catch up on NIL, period. That's going to happen. Next year, you're going to have half the advantage because there's going to be double the amount of schools doing exactly what you're doing. That's what's going to happen going forward. So, but where you will always be disadvantaged if we don't fix it is this TV deal thing. And that's for every school in the ACC.
Yeah, so, I just wanted to get to the point where you start seeing the starters and the top players on your team that's just hopping into the portal to go somewhere else to get paid.
Well, then that's going to happen not because of NIL, but because of the TV deal. The SEC will be a better league, a way more desirable league, regardless of NIL money. And the amount of money you would have to pay, even if you could afford it, to keep those kids at your school, you're going to be paying triple what an SEC school is paying, because they're not going to have to pay as much because they'll be selling the SEC. This is the league you come play in if you're actually an NFL caliber player. So as soon as a Florida State, a Miami, a Clemson develops an NFL guy, a Jordan Addison, they're going to go to the SEC. That's the future we're headed towards. And that has nothing to do with NIL. NIL could make that better, could save that, or it could just make it worse. In the short term, I think it's going to save it a little bit because Miami, Florida State, if we get our crap together, we can pay as much as for these players as we want. But long term, that TV revenue is still doing this with us. Here we are. Here's SEC. And every year that passes, the gap gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And I don't care how much NIL money you have, because these guys still have NIL money too up here, but they have all that other money more than you. And next thing you know, Miami and Florida State are going to be losing recruits to Kentucky and like Mississippi State and SEC schools that weren't even at the top of the conference. But any SEC school is going to be able to out-recruit probably almost every ACC school. And that's the scary future that I don't want,
All right, so I'm going to end it on this note. When we get to the point where kids are choosing to go to Vanderbilt over Florida State and Miami, that's when we have some problems. Anyways, man, appreciate you for coming on, spending this 2 hours, man, fly by in no time.
Yeah, wow, jeez.
Good show. Glad to have you on. I'll reach out to you sometime in the future, especially when we play against you guys and stuff like that.
For sure, man. For sure.
Good luck to college football as a whole.
As a whole, yes. We agree on that, right? Yep. All right, man. Take care. Appreciate it.
All right, guys. Thank you guys for coming in. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for hitting the like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. Shout out to Michael for coming on and giving his thoughts and opinions on the NIL matter. Hopefully it gets better for college football. But anyways, y'all have a good night, and I'm out.